Week four. Um, I as far as material was concerned, I didn't think it was as detailed as last week. Although there was some math involved. Obviously, the economic order quantity problem. That's why I try to put as many examples as possible into this week's materials. But this week I was going to cover how rebate affects demand, and subsequently how it affects the supply. There were some very good answers in the discussion questions um, that kind of skirted this, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. And then I'm going to talk about vendor managed inventory. And then after that, if we need to go into question 4-1 or 4-2 or whatever, we can go through that. I think we'll have enough time because this week the material, as I said, the material wasn't that. I didn't think it was as much as was last week.
Okay.
But but if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. I don't mind that at all. So okay, so rebates. Basically, the thing about rebates is, as everybody said in the class, the rebates take place at the point of the rebates take place at the point of sale, but the effects of the rebates are delayed. Obviously, either with like mail-in rebates, it's delayed until it's mailed in. Instant rebates, which are usually recommended for supply chains, and I'll go over that in a minute, are instantaneous. So you're right. The discount takes point at that point, and it's usually, for the most part, in most industries, rebates are used to either like get rid of old stock, or if you feel that you have a product that has a high price point. Like, for instance, let's say Apple and Samsung. If say Apple and Samsung phones, the consumers hold the same price point, basically saying that they both feel that they're both worth the same. That they'll both spend like $500 for the same phone. So Apple can't expect their customers to pay $600. What they'll do is, if their phone is priced at $600, they'll use a rebate as a means to move it down to a price point so they can compete with other people. They don't do it early on for obvious reasons, because early on you want to get the early adopters. You'll usually cash in on the people who will pay the $600 for the phone over the people that spend $500. But if once the early adopters come in and you have a problem moving the phones, and you could come in with a rebate strategy to bring it down to a lower price point, if price point is a problem with your product. The thing about rebates, I covered this graph last week. This is a graph of percentage of orders, which basically reflects demand and lead time. And in general, you have three categories. You have at-once customers, people who want their stuff right now. Okay, they're not willing to wait. Then you have at lead time, people who are willing to wait a little bit for the product. And then you have ones that are beyond lead time, people who are very flexible with their demand. So ideally, the goal is to shift your lead time to the left. Okay, you want to get the lead time so it's smaller and smaller, so that whole graph shifts to the left. And at the same time, you want to shift your demand to the right. You want to get as many people to buy your product either at lead time or beyond lead time as possible. And Amazon has a really good example of this. Like earlier, I ordered the Amazon 4K HD box that they have, and they said that if you order it now, it won't be available until October 25th. That's okay, cool. I'll buy it on October 25th. But at the same time, they had an option. If you want it right now, you can get a refurbished box, or you could buy one of these other competitor boxes, which may not be as good, but they do give you the option. But obviously, they do reward you by saying, hey, if you buy this later on, we'll give you the free upgraded shipping on this box. So that's Amazon's way of influencing demand. So once again, you want to shift your demand to the right. And at the same time, you want to shift your lead time to the left. So you want to make your lead time shorter and shorter, while at the same time, you want to move the number of people from the at once lead to the at lead time, and the at lead time to the beyond lead time. So obviously, as you shift your lead time, those categories will automatically shift. Now, what rebates do, rebates shifts your demand all the way to the left. So people purchase a product right now, because rebate takes place at the time of purchase, obviously. So what that'll do is all people, you may have had people who are like, well, you know, that Apple phone's a little bit expensive. I'll wait until the price drops, or I have to save a little bit of money to get the phone. But all of a sudden, the beyond lead time customers say, wow, I can get it right now. So all of a sudden, it shifts everything to the left. Now, in a push system, if you have the inventory and your forecasts are accurate, which are key, that could be a good strategy. But if you're in a pull system where you're trying to match your demand to your production, rebates cause artificial shifts in demand, which can be very difficult to track. And even with push systems, what I've seen personally is people will take the artificial demand created by rebates as actual demand. So their forecasting actually takes into consideration this rebate, which basically artificially inflates the demand over that time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Which subsequently they end up making more because they had more, demand forecasted, but the demand over a certain set of time is still the same. So all of a sudden you make more inventory for the same demand, and now you have more inventory later on. Overstock.com does a great business because of this problem. So last week I talked about Campbell's Soup had this, this was about 10 or 15 years ago. Campbell's Soup had a problem where they had a whole bunch of soup. And basically Campbell's Soup, their executive said, hey, marketing, we need to get rid of all this soup. So marketing came in with this massive sale where they basically sold the soup for like at cost, which was great for getting rid of the inventory. But what happened afterwards was that they noticed that people weren't buying as much soup over time. So what they began to realize after they spent some money researching this is that the people bought a whole bunch of soup and then put it on the shelf. You know, they may drink a lot of soup in the wintertime, but if you can get it in the summertime for half price and it'll stay on your shelf for a year, you buy it early, save the money, then you just put it on the shelf. The case study that I read about this, Campbell's Soup almost went out of business because of this, because they really didn't catch on. So you have to be careful about rebates, and that it does artificially inflate demand. Like I said, you know, Apple's pretty good about doing this. From what I've seen and from what I've read, they've got a pretty good demand forecasting model. But to be honest, I haven't seen Apple do a lot of rebates. Unless, have you?
No, they really don't. What they seem to do is they do with really good with forecasting, and and they really don't have excess. It seems, and any excess that they do have, they'll sell to like third party vendors, like to Walmart or whatnot.
Okay. How does their forecasting work? Because in general, like if you run a pool system, you want your forecasts as frequent as possible. So basically, lean supply chains, they really emphasize frequent small shipments with short lead time. So as a result, you have shorter and shorter forecasting. Does Apple do the same, or have you seen?
Well, they do. I had a hard time finding stuff on that. I know they do a full inventory turnover every 5 days.
Wow.
So
there sounds like, well, so I would think they'd have like a 5-day forecasting loop then.
Yeah.
Imagine how they get all the stuff from Foxconn. Wow.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
But you're also talking, so how big is an iPhone box? They don't make big products.
That's true.
So how many cell phones can you how many iPhones can you pack in a 737?
True.
Few
True.
100,000?
Yeah, that's a good point. When you deal with economic order quantity, that order quantity that you calculate encourages batch sizes. So let's say Apple does an economic order quantity, and it's 10,000 phones. We'll just say 10,000 phones. They say, okay, in order to optimize our holding costs and our order costs, we need to buy 10,000. Well, what if your lead time? What if your lead time to make 10,000 boxes is more than 5 days? In Apple's example,
Yeah.
so now you got to beat the whip. Whip the supply chain to get more products out, which is not a good idea. So ideally, what you would do is lean supply chain deals with making the lead time smaller through cutting out waste. So what Apple would do in that instance is, okay, we need to change the supply chain so that we can get the product through that window, that 10,000 products in that window in 5 days. Now, obviously, you have to have a good forecasting model too, because if your forecasting model's off, then you may end up with too much or too little inventory, even when you go with 10,000. So that's why lean supply chains try to deal with smaller lot sizes and more frequent shipments. So you have fewer oscillations in products in the supply chain.
Now, there was a few years ago when they went from the iPhone 5. Now, they made a big change. For the longest time, the iPhones from the first iteration through like the 5, there wasn't a lot of deviation in the size and the shape of the phone, the way it looked and how it and like the functionality changed a lot, but the shape and the way it looked didn't change a lot. Now, when they went from the 5 to the 6, there was a lot of change.
Okay, so if you remember when we talked about theory of postponement, you modularize a lot of your manufacturing. So, and that's
Yeah,
a great example where what you would do is you make this phone pretty much with the same chassis and the same screen, so that when you add different functions, the size is all the same, modularity is all the same, but the functionality is pushed further to the right in the supply chain, which allows Apple to do that. Of course, I think it kind of bit him in the rear a little bit though, because Samsung came out with bigger screen, better this, better that, and I was like, oh crap, now we have to adapt. But
yeah. So, but when they came out with the 6, they changed the size, and they came out with 2 different sizes, and they had some shortage problems initially.
sure, and that's to be expected. If you're looking at a supply chain that's used to making certain size of phone over and over and over again, all of a sudden you add a new supply line that's brand new and completely different. Once again, theory of postponement only works when all the products in your supply chain have similar features.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's a very good example. So, Roberto, we just talked about demand shifts, rebates. What rebate does? If you remember last week, we talked about this graph here, where we had 3 types of customers based on lead time and when they want the demand. So what a rebate does is it artificially shifts your demand to the left. So that people who may have waited to buy your product will now buy the product now. So as a result, you have something like this. This is just an example where you suddenly have a big rush of orders right now because people have the rebate. They've been incentivized to buy it now. And what that does is that creates artificial demand in your system. And I've seen examples where people take forecasts and they don't take notice of the artificial demand. And now the forecasts are inflated for that period. So so what happens is, if you do a rebate and you're not disciplined with your rebate, you end up creating an inflated forecast, and in the next shift you have increased inventory, and all of a sudden, increased inventory, but the demand over that time hasn't changed. That makes sense? Okay, great. So and last week we had talked about Campbell's Soup, the example where they sold a whole bunch of soup in the summer, and all of a sudden all the people that was going to buy soup later on didn't buy soup. They had a rebate. But Campbell's Soup tried to create more soup because they had a sudden increase in demand and no one was buying their soup. So they ended up having a lot of inventory, and as I said, they almost went out of business because of that. So any questions, Roberto, over this? Okay. I'm going to assume no. Okay. Okay, so pricing recommendations. I'm going to base this based upon I personally tend to lean towards lean supply chains. So a lot of this applies to lean supply chains, but some of this does apply to push strategies also. So a big thing to do is to reduce the lead times as much as possible. What this does is this allows you to manufacture to more accurate forecasts. So what this does is this reduces the possibility of having excess inventory, because rebates are usually used, I mentioned this earlier, usually used to either get rid of excess inventory or to shift a price point. And a price point, I'm going to really quickly go over this real quick. A price point is, let's say you have Apple and Samsung phone. If consumers generally view them both the same, the price point, basically the price will be perceived as equal. Let's say that they're both $500. If you have a price point that's higher, like let's say it's higher quality, let's say Apple's more popular, so Apple's price point may be $600. So Mark had talked about this earlier, but let's say you release your iPhone at the $600 price point, using this example, and a whole bunch of people buy your phone. But all of a sudden, once the early adopters buy your phone, you suddenly don't have people buying it. So what you do is you can offer a small rebate of $100 to shift the price point down to the $500 level, where all of a sudden now you're going to start selling phones again. So rebates are very good for shifting price points, and it's also good for getting rid of inventory. Okay, so second thing, make shipments as small and as frequent as possible. And this is a good point. This goes with the first one. If you have pricing such that you don't have these massive oscillations in your demand, you're more able to link your shipments to the demand, especially if you have short lead times. Okay. And they'll say keep prices as stable as possible. This goes with the other ones, to reduce artificial spikes in demand and subsequent cutbacks in future orders. We just discussed that also. As discounts do produce unpredictable demand surges in a supply chain. And the key note is on unpredictable, because when you provide a discount, unless you have a very good model as to your price points, as to the effects of discounts on overall consumption, which is very hard. And this is going to go with the next step. Unless you have that, it's very difficult to understand the actual demand. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. And the last thing, allocate products in the supply chain based upon past orders, not present demand. This is important. This goes back to the oscillations. If you place your products in the supply chain based upon present demand, you'll be having a case where the tail wags the dog, where you'll be chasing these oscillations, and as a result, you'll be creating more oscillations in your supply chain. We're going to cover this under the bullwhip effect, and I'll probably go into a lot of detail on that, because I think that's very important for understanding how the supply chain reacts to bullwhip effect. The book does a good job, to be fair, but I will go over that again in more detail in the video con. So, any questions or anything to add on this? Okay. Yeah, rebates are fairly easy. Okay. Yeah? Okay. I'm going to go over vendor managed inventory. This is a fairly simple concept. Basically, vendor managed inventory places all of the control of your supply chain elements with the vendor. And it does this through sharing information throughout the entire system. So now all of these different elements have the information that they require to provide the vendor with the product that they need. So manufacturing requires the most accurate demand information possible so that they know how much product to make. The retailer in this system provides almost instantaneous, and if you Walmart, I think it's like daily. They provide daily information. Okay, so someone's awake. So so in the warehouse, they need to know how much product they need to store. So if the retailer is able to tell manufacturing how much product they're going to make, the warehouse will automatically know how much is going to be coming. And since we have a better control over demand, the warehouse will have a need to store less. And the distributor has the same strengths. And the retailer obviously is able to be better able to order products based upon their demand. So VMI, the main thing it does is it reduces consumption reporting time. Some of the lead time is taken up by actual delay in the instant. Okay. So basically what happens is almost the warehouse and the distributor actually almost take on the same role. As I mentioned earlier with Mark, distributors aren't really a big fan of VMI because VMI takes away their job. So this actually virtually tightens your supply chain to reduce lead time elements based upon delays in ordering. And your forecasting also becomes better because you have more accurate forecasting because there's no delays. So here's some advantages real quick. I'll just run through these real quick. They reduce the number of purchasing, inspection, and storage functions because, once again, there's no chain for them to go through. Each of those elements don't need to have their own functions. Everything is done all at once. So everyone knows what everyone else is doing. This requires visibility of the rate of product being consumed. So if the manufacturer has an accurate forecasting of how much product is required, then the vendor will automatically know how much is being made. And this also provides vendor the ability to control discounts and sales. So they may say, hey, look, we want to stimulate sales of these products. We want you to make this much more because we expect demand to be much more. This allows vendors a lot more control over products being made. So the supplier also gets visibility on the rate of product being consumed, which is very helpful because obviously the supplier, manufacturer, same thing. The supplier doesn't want to make too much product, obviously, because then they got to worry about holding it. This allows them to create less product over time. And the main function of this is on shortening lead time effects due to delays in reporting. And it also gives the retailer visibility on replenishment rates. They could see when the supplier is able to manufacture goods. Now, what it doesn't do is communicate capacity. What it does is it gives the retailer a visibility over past performance on their ability to provide products, which is helpful, but it doesn't provide information over their capacity. It allows suppliers to prioritize shipments better because what it does is now the suppliers are able to allocate their products to the supply chain using vendor data better. This is assuming that the vendor has multiple locations. So the vendors and the suppliers can get together to spread the inventory out where it's needed better, which reduces bulk buying. Virtually shortens the supply chain. I talked about that earlier. Basically, it reduces the time for information to go through the supply chain. And it provides frequent communication of inventory levels, stock shortages, and planned promotions. Once again, this allows the vendor to say, hey, I want to have a sale of X product. This is how much demand that we expect. This is how much product that we want in these locations. Okay. And it also provides them with increased control over the discount levels and the effects, because they can actually track the effects of consumption over discounts almost in real time, which allows for the supply chain to react to these artificial consumption demands better than previously. It allows for more even allocation of inventory. So that's pretty simple. Now, weaknesses. The weaknesses are mostly behavioral. Suppliers have a marketing function that basically goes out and tries to sell their product. But in a VMI relationship, the role of marketing is pretty much almost neutered, except for new product introduction. Because one of the things that marketing does is they create promotions of existing inventory. Well, if you have less inventory, then that reduces incentives to move stock. So marketing in general has shown, there's some examples like Barilla Pasta had this problem where they went to a VMI and their marketing almost rebelled because all of a sudden their incentive structures went away. And this is a problem with lean supply chains in general. And so if you want to know more about this, look up lean supply chains and marketing, and it'll give you some more details on how this works. So less inventory creates fears of control over insufficient inventories. Even though you have a leaner inventory system, sometimes vendors get afraid that, oh my goodness, we're going to have a sale and we may not have enough stock. So sometimes you'll still see bulk ordering from people who still aren't comfortable with VMI. This doesn't completely take away VMI. VMI doesn't completely take away bulk ordering. It does take away a lot of the lack of information that causes bulk ordering, but you'll still have some people, some vendors may still not be comfortable with having lean supply chains. Especially when, one case in point, this is something that there was a grocery chain, off the top of my head, I don't remember, where they went with a VMI. It may have been Whole Foods, but I have to look it up. They went with the VMI system, and as a result, they realized that they didn't need as much shelf space. So they reduced the shelf space because the amount of product they need to have on the shelf was less because they were getting more frequent small orders instead of large orders. Well, the distributors reacted negatively because they said, hey, look, we pay for shelf space. And if you're shrinking our shelf space, that means that we're less competitive, without thinking that everyone else had less shelf space also. So it takes a new mindset to kind of go through VMI. So distributors lose control over their distribution. Distributors in the old days, they'd have multiple products and they would be responsible for distributing multiple products to multiple customers. Well, if a customer has VMI, the distributor is no longer needed because the customer sets distribution levels in a VMI, not the distributor. So the distributor usually has to redo their role within the system. And once again, inefficient modeling can produce inventory shortages. If you use push modeling, push supply chain modeling on VMI, and you do the bulk order system, there's still a tendency to create bulk orders that may be bigger than what your system needs. So some of the modeling has to be changed to match VMI strengths. Okay. Any questions on this?
No.
Okay. So that's really it. That's all I really had for this week as far as VMI and rebates. To recap, rebates aren't recommended for supply chains, especially in a pull system, because it artificially stimulates demand. It pushes that demand curve to the left. So unless you have a subsequent lead time shift to the left, it creates an artificial demand where if everyone isn't cognizant of it, your forecasts get error. Error is created in your demand forecasting, and you create more inventory. There are some examples where rebates have actually fueled more inventory, which fueled more rebates, which fueled more inventory, which fueled more rebates, especially when customers get smart on the rebates. Like the Campbell soup offer, if a person knows that they can wait until June to buy their soup that they normally buy in December, they'll buy it, they'll buy it in June. So, and then with VMI shortens the supply chain by making the information go through it much quicker. Some of a lead time is information based. So you can reduce the information and provide better forecasting, which will allow you to decrease your forecasting, which makes you able to make smaller batches and smaller lead time. But it does lead to a mismatch from the way things used to be, and distributors tend to not be comfortable with a VMI because their role is pretty much made obsolete. So it's not to say that all distribution centers go bankrupt. But what happens is the distribution center changes how they do their business, how they add value to the vendors change. Any questions? Did you guys want me to go over 4.2 a little bit?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a tough time on the reading this week, understanding everything. It was difficult for me to read the chapter.
Okay. One thing that I told Mark, Mark, one of the questions Mark had was about seasonality. He says, I work in the tech world where seasonality doesn't really apply. So we were talking about it, and he brought up the tech product curve, and he brought Moore's law, in which case basically says that something that's released becomes obsolete in 18 months. So you can use that as like a seasonality curve. My main concern with this class overall is that you are able to take the information, synthesize it, and apply it. So if your real life situation is different than the discussion question, and you're able to apply all the information to your specific industry, then that's fine. I have no problem. So let me look. Okay, so the 4-2 basically says the manufacturer is trying to decide how many units to produce for the upcoming season. If too many are produced, some of the products may be left unsold by the manufacturer to the distribution center. If too few products are produced, the manufacturer may lose some potential profit. Okay. And a similar challenge is faced by the distribution center. Too many products are bought by the distribution center from the manufacturer, so the products may be left unsold by the distribution center to the retail stores. And if too few products are brought to the distribution center may lose some potential profit it can make for themselves to the retail stores. Okay. So discuss how the manufacturing distribution center can resolve their respective challenges. So let me go back up to our graph here. So basically, you had manufacturing. They're talking about manufacturing and the distributor, right? Yeah. So the warehouse. I'm going to assume that the warehouse function. I'm going to turn on my tablet here. I'm going to try to do some drawing. So in this example, the warehouse function and manufacturing share their function. So, so problems faced by all three of these is manufacturing needs to know how much demand. So how much demand is coming, and the retailer needs to know how much supply is available. Okay. The distributor is kind of in the middle. They're vulnerable. They want demand and supply to be equal. Okay. So if demand and supply is equal, the distributor's happy. If demand is greater than supply, then they have shortages. Okay, and then the retailer's not happy. But if supply is greater than demand, then you have over inventory, in which case the manufacturer is not happy, because in many cases the manufacturer has to warehouse it. Now, some distributors do warehouse stuff, but for the most part, a lot of times manufacturing, if manufacturing creates so much based on so much demand that they were told, and the distributor doesn't pull it from them, then the manufacturing has to hold the excess. Okay. Or worst case, if the distributor does have an agreement with manufacturing where they do purchase all of what is demanded, then the distributor suddenly takes on the role of warehousing. Okay. So either way, inventory isn't good. So now, how the manufacturer and distribution center can resolve their respective challenges. So the key for this is for the distributor to be able to tell manufacturing the amount of supply required, by basically telling them how much demand it is. So now, there are several ways you can do this. The big thing is, what you can go through with this, basically say, okay, how would you improve the accuracy of your demand and supply data? Okay, how would you increase, these things, make them more accurate? Maybe you can, with the VMI, share this information so that everybody has it. Okay, you could do that. You can also make agreements about warehousing also. Let's say, if say supply is higher than the demand, then you may make an agreement with the warehouse, in a way that benefits manufacturing, or vice versa. Okay, if demand is greater than supply. Well, now, if demand is greater than supply, then the distributor loses out. So you got to make a way for, obviously, the best solution is to have the demand and supply equal. Okay, so everybody win-win. Okay. So you can look at ways to make so demand deals with forecasting. Okay, actually, both of these are forecasting. Okay. And supply deals with capacity and lead time. Okay. So you can look at solutions that allows the manufacturing to better understand demand, or ways for the distributor to best understand the supply. Okay, and if you notice here, the distributor is directly linked to the end user. So ideally, any solution where you provide benefits within a VMI has to deal with this relationship and how it is communicated to manufacturing. Okay. Does that make sense?
Remove the distributor.
Pardon?
Remove the distributor.
Well, that'd be great, yeah. Of course, the distribution center may disagree about that. That doesn't help the distribution center. And that's what Walmart did, actually. Walmart did a lot of this. Well, we don't need distributors anymore. We basically either make distributors in-house and basically change their function as basically holding houses. Like distributors in from what I understand, from Walmart's system, well, Procter & Gamble had this problem. And I remember reading a case study a while back where Procter & Gamble basically made their distributors into safety stocks. They said, hey, distributors, your whole job is basically to deal with fluctuations in demand that we don't deal with through our normal supply chain. So distributors basically became safety stocks, because distributors had access to all the different the end vendors. So they said, okay, we'll give you all the information. Your job is to track. We'll say, hey, we're seeing more demand at this area than in this area. Shift your safety stock to a certain point, or vice versa. We're not seeing as much demand over here, so shift it over here, using risk pooling techniques that we learned a couple weeks ago. So yeah, as I said, you're right. You can get rid of the distribution. Although I don't know how you're going to be able to make it beneficial to the distribution center to get rid of their jobs, unless you're going to say that you're just going to change their jobs. But making them into a safety stock is one thing that's been done. You can consider that. Your answer just, if I can just make a recommendation, focus on this relationship and focus how distribution can improve manufacturing's understanding of demand, and how manufacturing can better allow distribution to better understand their supply. I even like to add capacity, because if you end up pulling out more stuff than the manufacturing has a capacity for, you're in trouble. Find ways to reduce lead time. Like for instance, you can say, hey, look, we're going to make it so that we have shorter lead times and smaller batches, so that there's less risk of large inventories being held by manufacturing, and there's also less risk of oversupply. So that's just an idea. So does this help, Roberto?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, it's, once again, just work with this. I don't think you can make a perfect solution, but look at ways that you can address the challenges that I said. With manufacturing, is knowing how much supply is needed, or how much demand there is, and the distributor knowing how much supply is being made. And then work from that down to, okay, now that we've dealt with how to make those easier, how are we going to make the collaboration between those two parts? Because each side has information and has control over elements that the other side has. Okay. Yeah, Roberto, I've recorded this whole thing, so I'm going to I'll I'll try to put it on YouTube. I haven't tried to put something this big on YouTube, so I'll just put it up there for you to watch, and you could watch at your heart's content. I'll see if I can maybe cut this out and make this separate. But if not, you'll at least be able to watch this whole presentation and then just go back and forth to where you wanted to go. Okay? You're welcome, Roberto. All right. Is there anything else I can cover for you guys?
I think we're good.
All right. Yeah, next week is going to start getting pretty meaty. So while you guys are reading, if there's anything that you need me to discuss in these video conferences, feel free to send me an email and let me know so I can prepare for it. Because they're going to start throwing some new concepts at you in week 5 that are going to be, starting in week 5, it's going to be quite a shift in gears.